Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webcast, brought to you by Cogent Law and Regiment Securities. Today, we're going to be talking about M&A readiness, what buyers are looking for before they proceed. My name is Dean Delisle. I am the Chief Revenue Officer and a partner here at Regiment, and we focus in the capital market space. And I started in capital markets with Merrill Lynch back in 1982. So now you know how old I am. Um, and we do cap intro, cap placement. We represent issuers. We do a lot of M&A work, which we're going to be talking about today. And then we also take companies maybe through M&A or maybe onto an IPO. So we do a lot of public offerings and prep work and things like that. So we're known for our distribution and demand generation and our success in the marketplace. Today, I'm joined by my co-host Jack Bowerman, and excited to have him on with us today. So, Jack, welcome.
Thank you, Dean. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I'm Jack Bauman, and my background is been around a similar length of time to Dean. I started in the mid '80s at Skadden Arps, New York office as a mergers and acquisitions attorney, focusing not just on M&A but corporate financings. Um, Work with private equity as well as family offices. And on the financing side, both private placements through primarily Reg D, as well as public offerings, IPOs, preferred stock offerings. And I've also spent time on the in-house side of the ledger, so I understand the legal aspects from the client perspective, having been chief legal officer of several public companies, the best known of which is Public Storage. And while I was there, helped double the size of the company with a $5 billion hostile takeover of their biggest competitor. So, been around long enough. We've certainly see everything there is to do in corporate law. Currently with Cogent Law Group, which is based in Washington, D.C. I'm personally in South Florida and Fort Lauderdale, licensed in Florida and New York. So I think we're off to the races.
There you go. All right. Well, today we're going to be talking about, what buyers expect, people that want to buy your company. Before we get started, uh, I just want to mention something real quick. So, I'm broadcasting live in Chicago, and Jack, you're broadcasting where?
From Fort Lauderdale.
Oh, nice and warm there. So if you guys could find the Q&A or the question and answer, and this is where you're going to ask questions throughout the program. If you could just type in where you're checking in from really quick, we'll know that you found that, and then you can ask questions throughout the program. So, so I think I gave a pretty good background on Regiment. So I think we're an investment bank, we're a broker dealer, and we're doing a lot in the capital space. So I think we're good with that one. And Jack, I don't know if you want to go any deeper on Cogent at all or the background. You gave a little bit of it.
Sure. Cogent is a national law firm. It's based in Washington, D.C., but we have offices or attorneys up and down the East Coast. We mainly work remotely. This even predating COVID, that was how we chose to organize ourselves. And as a result, we save on the expensive office towers and law libraries, and we pass that savings along to clients and generally, provide big firm work at, approximately half the price of a typical mid-sized firm. And we focus not just on corporate. We have a very strong fintech digital asset group. We have a group that does cannabis banking as well as cannabis work, and then the more traditional employment litigation, what have you. So,
Yeah, and just to note that we leverage Cogent Law for a lot of those raises that we do, and every category that Jack just mentioned, we also raise capital for. So that's That's part of the name of the game here. So, Jack, I say we dive in on this because I think we have a lot of good things to cover for the folks in the audience. And I do
Sure.
see people from all over. We have everywhere from LA, Texas, New York, India, so all over the world. So, welcome to all of you out there. Um, so one of the things I mentioned to Jack early on is when we're doing a capital raise for a company, some of these best practices we're going to talk about apply when you're raising capital. And sometimes after, companies raise that capital and they stop operating, they stop these practices. So I just want you to listen to the things that we're talking about and put them in context. So whether you're looking to sell your company today, tomorrow, it's better than waiting till you're going to sell your company and then scramble to do everything because a buyer consents that you're scrambling. They know it's a scramble. So, so a couple of things we're going to mention. So one thing I think about, Jack, and we were just talking about this today, is to establish some sort of a board cadence. And I know you guys help with structures and agreements for board of directors, advisory boards, executive boards. So what are your thoughts on that in terms of how early should you do that and what's the structure you see most out there?
Sure. A lot of people think that M&A begins, when you hire an investment banker. But to Dean's point, there's, a ton of readiness that goes into preparing, a well-run, well-organized company for taking the next step as a seller, buyer, what have you. And Dean's right. I mean, the board is a critical area of focus. It's one of the things that buyers will look at. The board and management team and the corporate governance in general. They're going to look at how decisions are made in an organization. They're going to look for a cohesive and informed board, not just full of insiders, but people with broad expertise that can advise the company and be good stewards of shareholder capital. And they're looking for a deep management structure. Not just buyers will notice if there's if the company is really founder run, founder driven, and sort of a single owner dependent model. That raises issues later on, and it signals that a business may or may not be scalable or easy to integrate if it's focused around one person.
Yeah.
And so, go ahead.
No, no, I know. That's what I was thinking of. And it was funny when I say that because I literally had two of those types of companies that we spoke about earlier. And, it's just interesting how long and what's funny is when I was thinking about this and talking with those founders this morning, that was me as a founder years ago, right? It was like, I'm the majority shareholder. I don't need a board of directors. I don't need to listen to anybody. And then when it came time for my M&A to happen, it was upside down. It was like I had to scramble. And again, I could feel the buyers knew that was going on. So that's why, I sort of come from that level of experience where I know, what it does cost. And it does cost you money because it changes your valuation. So, um,
Sure. And they're going to look for things like independence and whether, and what it kind of comes down to in a way is it's almost whether the company is run, in an institutional fashion or personally by a founder or, a very, very centric CEO. Um, but as Dean said, that can create valuation issues or discount valuation if the company is not seen as having an independent board and otherwise a deep management team and processes and structures for things like documentation and how decisions are made.
right. I think about also, piggybacking off of that, I think about what I call decision discipline. So, that's something that can easily be seen in a company, and that could be based on updates that come from the company, even social media posts, press releases, anything that. that people can find or see how you operate. And so a lot of times when there's not a lot of cooperative leaders in a company, or it's one person or two people making all the decisions, all of a sudden there's a lot of pivots that happen in the business and people can see that, so you have this jagged line of growth or whatever it looks like. And and just make sure if you do need to pivot or you do need to shift, that you document the rationale behind that. That's another thing I see is that people often don't update PPMs or executive or, summaries or things like that to show that this is part of our blueprint, but our blueprint had to change because of the market or because of something else. So you probably see that too, right, Jack?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and people will look at things like, the accountability, that management is held to if they have a budget, and they'll look at, what the actual outcomes are versus projections and what have you. They're gonna look at things like how you allocate capital and how capital investments are evaluated, whether you have a process for making those investments, or pricing decisions, or whether it's a seat of the pants. All of those things are going to impact, how, the extent to which, it's easy to integrate and to fold into, a new owner.
Yeah, I was consulting and coaching a CEO one time, and I put he was classic for walking into a room and not prepping anybody and then just dropping what I call a grenade in the room. And so then I put up a sign, a grenade free zone is what I put up on the wall. And I told him this sign is for you to stare at before you take a seat in this room. And it took a while, but he sort of changed his ways. So but the team can run, inside a larger organization without blowing it up. So there's my analogy for the grenade. Um, so let's talk a little bit about why profitability versus acquirability, which sounds a little bit like a mouthful. But um, I was talking to somebody this morning and they said about show quality of earnings, not just positive EBITDA, so you want to speak to anything about that? I know we're not, on an accounting call here, but we all understand books
No,
and
no, but to your point, quality of earnings is key. Profitability speaks more to, historical paper performance, but acquirability of a company is driven by things like quality of earnings, and the buyers are going to look at things like, recurring revenue and high quality cash flow rather than, one-time spikes in earnings or aging accounts receivable. It's they're going to look at revenue concentrations, customer churn, non-recurring revenue, and whether the margins are sustainable. All of those things go to acquirability, and a highly profitable but concentrated or personality-driven business may trade at a discount.
yeah, that's a good call. And another thing that comes in is back to the founder component is founder dependent revenue. So if you're not developing systems to replicate the processes that the founder is really good at to generate revenue, then you're going to get caught into a bind where the founder is going to be stuck or tied to the valuation of that sale.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Um, and ultimately, it comes down to scalability and how transferable, the business is, from, the way it's being run, pre-sale, pre-acquisition to, what a buyer can hope for and look for and expect, post-closing.
Yeah, and have a, and I know every business is different, but maybe, make sure you show you know, more, to do with your contracts, how your contracts are run. So a lot of buyers will come in and they will examine the contract, see how solid it is, or, can a big customer bail on your contract and leave leave the whole operation a bind. And, too many times, and this is what Cogent does really well, is they're protecting you by looking at your agreements and contracts to make sure that it's not just for when you sell the business, but while you're operating the business that you can't get, left holding the bag. You've ramped up, you've hired a bunch of people, and now all of a sudden somebody bails on your contract, which is a nightmare to deal with. We've seen it too many
Sure.
times.
Sure. And they'll even look at things like change of control provisions and the key contracts and things like that. I mean, to the extent that you need to go to a third party to approve a sale, because there's a change of control going on. Everything can slow down the process, can, introduce an element of risk to the process. So, yeah, all that legal mumbo jumbo and paperwork, it adds up. But having a smooth process and consistency in your contracting and how you go about doing it and, avoiding, certain types of contracting traps, all of those things will make you more attractive to a buyer.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you're hearing some of these tips today, just know that we don't want you to get overwhelmed. We want you to be prepared. So write down these things, and then you don't have to do them all at once. You don't have to panic and do everything at once, but just make sure it's a goal of something to pay attention to, maybe something to go back to the company and take a look at and make sure you're just prepared, because maybe you're not ready to sell today, but maybe in a few years from now you are. But if you start now, then you're going to be ready for when that day comes. Um, Next, we're going to jump into reporting rigor as a proxy for management quality. I was like, man, that's a mouthful of things to talk about. But I think some things that people don't prepare for or budget for, is just audited financials, right? And we have gap aligned financials and just regular outside audited financials. What do you see around that, Jack?
I think people are going to look, whether it's GAAP or some other accounting metric. I think what it can be most important is the accuracy and speed of financial reporting. If
Yes.
you're inconsistent about when you can report, or if you have a date that people are expecting you to report earnings and you miss the date, it can cause all sorts of stress and drama, including on the stock price, value of the company. But gap compliant, audit ready numbers, those type of things build trust and telegraph a management team that's capable of handling a larger, more complex organization.
Yeah, that's important. I'm going to go back to something that you mentioned too. I think about monthly closings being consistent, right? Not having
Hmm.
multiple months open and then having to go back and do journal entries and adjustments. That shows up like a red flag when somebody's looking at the books and they're evaluating the company. That tells them about your integrity, your operating practices, etc. So monthly should be no more than 10 to 15 days. I know some of you might have complex businesses, maybe manufacturing, there's inventory reconciliation. Just make sure you make that as tight and regular as possible.
And they'll look at the audit history and the degree to which your auditors are signing off on time and without a lot of drama. They'll look at internal controls, and how closely you're adhering to gap. Slow closing and ad hoc adjustments. All that suggests weak internal infrastructure.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of I have a big tech background, so I'm all about, dashboards, KPIs, things like that. So if you can show any type of management tool that doesn't have to be printed out, that shows that you're real time, you're live, you're looking at the business and you're making decisions off of that live data, I think that's important. And typically the most important ones are the ones that drive revenue, control margins, and cash. Just think about those three, right? So you have revenue, margins, and cash, and there's different dashboards for different departments, but those are things I think that are important.
And for people who may not be used to some of the, concepts that we're kicking around here, some of these accounting or legal, what have you, a KPI is simply, it's just a metric. that measures performance against a strategic objective. And it's going to be helpful, and add value to the extent it's clearly defined, consistently tracked, and tied to the incentives that executives receive, their annual bonuses or quarterly or, whatever it is, their option grants, all that stuff. To the extent that, the KPIs are, and achieving them is tied to incentives that aligns, management interests with the shareholders. And that's an important thing they look for.
Yeah, absolutely. And for my creative pioneer founders out there, be careful with custom metrics. Like you get into your own lingo and you get fancy and things like that. If you do, make sure that you have like a translation table so people know what they're looking at. Because there's very common terms around revenue, around margins, around costs and everything else. Try to stay as true to those common terms as possible. Because if you think about it, some companies are going to come in and they're going to want to determine that they have to integrate to your company. It may not just be that they're coming in to buy your company to operate it. They may, it might be a private equity firm. They might be coming in to merge this into other companies too. So you have to think about it from that perspective.
Good point.
Yeah. Um, so I know we have an explosive theme here. So the next one is where early shortcuts become diligence landmines. Is this a war zone that we're in, Jack?
Yeah. We're edging into the legal war zone here. We're
Yeah,
out of
I know.
accounting, and out of the blue into the black. But yeah, my reaction is one of the first things that comes to my mind when we talk about, shortcuts becoming diligence landmines. One of the first things people are going to look at, and I come back to the contracts, and the contracting process within an organization. Things like unsigned agreements, or you can't produce an executed copy, side letters, things like auto renewals without documentation. Again, I bring up the change of control triggers. All of those are things that a buyer is going to look at and, potentially, form a view that informal contracting can equate to governance weakness. Um,
Yeah.
so, uh, so
No,
that's
I
certainly
trust them.
something.
I trust them. We signed on it. We've done it before. It's fine.
Yeah.
Those are the things that make I just want to make you cringe.
A little bit. Well, okay, it's the full employment approach, full employment act for lawyers when stuff needs to get cleaned up. But
Woo. I
you
know.
try
I
to
know.
avoid that, on the go in, and
Been through too
you know,
many of those. There's also I think about this just because I've missed the boat and I've been ahead of the boat a few times on this, but I think about what I call clean IP ownership. It's like think about it from day one, right? What part of your business is different than any other business, any other competitor that makes you more valuable, your unique selling proposition, whatever it is, the processes you do, and what can you protect? And there's folks like Cogent that you can talk to for that. But Jack, do you want to comment on that? Because I'm sure you've seen 1,000 of these.
oh yeah, and it's especially critical in technology and service business, and a situation where, for example, a company may bring in a contractor, to create some IP for the company, and but they don't lock down the assignments and the ownership of the IP, that this is work made for hire, and it's owned by the company, and not the contractor can go resell it to the next two or three companies down the road. They're going to look at things like open source on the IP, and which can create some compliance gaps, and they're going to look at how formal around the brand ownership and how you've got things, locked down, register your key trademarks and patents, and uncertainty in this area that can really impact valuation. So
Well
we
said.
and that
And
is an area
yeah,
that we do try to help companies tighten up.
Yeah, and I think it's an exercise that should have an annual review. I mean, what do you think on that? How often you check in on that?
I think corporate housekeeping in general, it's almost like spring cleaning. It's a good time to have a spot check go in, and I think some well-run companies will do it a little more regularly, but I think a minimum annually is a good plan and a good objective. Just calendar it, just like you calendar other things. It comes around the time sometimes of annual reporting, or when people's bonuses are getting calculated, things like that. Just put it on the calendar along with those other important events, or just quarterly reporting.
Yeah, there's and I was going to say the theme to this for me is don't defer your legal cleanup until the raise or the exit, because that can get you, because again, you're going to be scrambling, things are going to get missed. And then I think you guys put in these contracts something called a clawback, right, Jack?
Oh yeah, no.
Which
Oftentimes
means that if you miss something and they find it after the fact, that could be trouble.
you can get into some really interesting scenarios there, because I think anyone who's looked at a typical M&A agreement, they'll see that there's a series of representations and warranties that are made, and then there'll be some disclosure schedule with exceptions to those. What follows those is the indemnifications. And the indemnifications, go to whether the reps that you made pre-closing, turn out to be true or not. And the clawback comes in, where there's, identified, the fact that, there's a breach of a representation, that you're current with your taxes, or that, that your, contracts, key contracts were all signed, and, what have you. And then you get into some very complex negotiations and a sale of things like baskets and caps, and it can get to be a nightmare, but it can really put at risk a significant portion of the purchase price that a buyer receives. So from our perspective, when we're representing a seller, Cogent's approach is to, number one, you try to limit, the reps and the warranties as best you can, or qualify them with materiality or knowledge, things like that. But also, try to avoid, the situations where there's a potential for one of those breaches or loss of value, so that a seller who thinks he's getting $10 million for his business doesn't end up with 6 million or some other number.
Yeah, right. All right, let's move into one of my favorite areas, how cap tables tell a story buyers don't ignore. Oh boy.
Oh yeah.
What's the craziest one you've seen?
Oh, cap tables. I don't know. A messy cap table, can contain things like, some disgruntled minority shareholders, or too many friends and family types that can be disruptive, and can potentially hold a deal up. I think in a cap table, you're really going to look to how clean it is, how, the how institutional it is, and so it doesn't just come across as being a family-owned shop, or people owning shares who really have the potential or some history of being disruptive, and resisting, moves that the company, is would be looking to make. I mean, it sometimes is called dead equity, dead DEAD equity,
Yeah.
which, it's just tied up, too much capital is tied up with the wrong people, and that can slow down a transaction, or block it, or, create, unexpected hurdles in the closing process.
No, absolutely. And I mean, I had one that had an A round, a B round, a C round, a D round, an E round, an F round, and then but what was weird is that when they were all structured different, they should be tiered, right? Where the
Hmm.
people that got in earliest should have the best benefit, not the people that um that, jump in after the fact or beyond that fact. And so, that's that's something that I've seen too much of, is that where it's just, staggered, right? It just doesn't make sense.
Well, yeah, but there are limits. I mean, the people who come in early, when it's the riskiest and put in the early money, I absolutely agree. They're entitled to get a good deal or get potentially a discount on their equity. Where it gets murky and where it gets really muddy, where I've seen it is where the early people who come in, they get some kind of supermajority voting provision, which
Yeah.
is outsized to the size of their investment, or there are some complicated side agreements with the people who come in early, such that they have some other springing right down the road, or some complex convertible, formula in this,
Right. Oh yeah, that's
I,
another one that comes up. Yeah. Um,
exactly. So,
you
any
know,
and all of those things, can significantly impact value and create friction in a negotiation.
And just know that because maybe you had, one thing that's sort of related to this is, you're always going to have, depending on how long you run without maybe, equity, capital being returned to investors or things like that. And depending on the size of your cap table, you're going to have people that want to get out at different phases. So make sure that along the way, if you're well organized, you can keep that straight. Because if you're trying to buy somebody out, you want to make sure that the person that's buying those shares are buying into the right segment of the cap table. That's another thing I see that happens. They're supposed to be buying, these Class A shares or Class B shares, but they're really buying Class D shares, and they have, it's not made clear up front. So
Sure, sure.
yeah, for sure. So anything else you want to talk about on cap tables?
Cap tables, I don't, keep an eye out for hidden economic obligations, things
Yeah.
like, phantom equity, phantom stock, or, some kind of revenue sharing, or, agreements, or, earnouts, things like that. Any and all of those things, can complicate a cap table analysis. So, the cleaner it can be, the better off, the eventual seller is going to be. And I think this all goes to the notion that, M&A readiness, it's not a pre-processed checklist. It's an operating philosophy. And people who are cognizant of these things and are thinking them through as they're operating the business, under a clear blue sky without a transaction pending, they're the ones who are, going to form the good habits and the right habits and avoid some of these traps.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to remind people, remember the Q&A section. So if you do have questions, we have some questions coming in and we'll address those in the next few minutes when we get to the Q&A section. So go ahead and type those in and we'll keep watching. So the last section here is why last minute cleanup destroys leverage. And we're talking about leverage for you, the business owner, not leverage for the buyer. Because, if last minute cleanup is happening, you're giving leverage away for sure.
No,
Right?
and Dean's absolutely right. I mean, last minute scrambles, to reconcile accounts or formalize processes, it shows through. It sends a signal that you have a reactive management team, not a proactive one, and that there is likely to be, or very potentially, previously undisclosed risk or control, deficiencies. Any and all of those things can result in a lower multiple, or a bigger pre-closing escrow or post-closing escrow. Broader reps, longer survival periods. It translates out, in a whole bunch of ways. The by having these things neatly tied down and locked down, you know, um, early, you're just in a much better shape. You want to be able to produce at least 12 to 24 months of clean reporting is one thing I would target, if
That's
not
nice.
more.
Yeah. And something that will tie into also, we talked about creating systems and regular procedures, right? So if you have those in place, and let's say they're coming in to start to look at things and they're asking you for contracts or contract history, or they're asking you for things and it takes you a week to get them those things, and typically it shouldn't take you a week, that's going to be a huge red flag. I mean, they know if you're taking a week, you're disorganized, that you don't have that stuff ready, and then it starts to drag out, and then the deal starts to diminish.
And deals that lie die.
Yeah,
A prepared seller is one that anticipates diligence questions and is ready for them. And they frame risk proactively. They have organized data rooms that they can just simply, give someone access to. It all just reduces negotiation friction and you know lets you come across as being the adults in the room that you are, for having built this company, and let you take the proper credit for that.
yeah, for sure. And make sure you fix your issues before the bankers are hired. I wanted to throw that one in there because it gets really expensive if you have bankers fix your business problems. I can
Yeah,
tell you that firsthand.
and once you have that reputation, even in the eyes of your own bankers, I mean, they get less bullish on what they can ask for in a multiple, and almost have a first round of negotiation with your bankers before you actually get to the actual buyers. So,
Yeah. And then, Jack, as you know, we have to build a lot of data rooms, and hopefully
mhm.
most of you know what a data room is, but if you want to reach out afterwards, I can give you a template for what we call a compliant data room, which means that this is an area that when someone is investing in your business or looking to buy your business, that it's all up to date. So, it could contain things like financials. So when you're doing your financial reporting, just be in the habit of putting it in the data room, right? Remember we talked about pivots in the business. You make pivots in the business plan changes, put that in the data room. You have significant contracts that affect the business, put it in the data room. You have IP that Cogent helps you file or whoever, put it in the data room. So those things should be maintained, and that data room should be a place so that no matter when you're ready to sell the business, because you might have an amazing buyer show up. This just happened. I just was talking to somebody last week, and an amazing buyer showed up, and it was a tremendous opportunity, but it had a short fuse on it. That means a limited window where the buyer was coming in with a ridiculous amount of money, and the person couldn't pull things together in time to pull it off. So they went to another business to purchase. And so, Jack, how often do you guys get involved in the data rooms? I mean, I see all your legal documents in our data rooms, but I don't know, other than that, how you get involved.
Well, preferably as early as possible, and and to the extent that that stuff is just cleared out, organized, locked down, and and pitch ready. Such that when you do get the buyer on the hook, you want to keep them on the hook,
Right.
and not make them, as Dean said, have to wait a week or 2 weeks to get access to the things they're asking you for. You want to give them that elevator pitch and then go straight to giving them the detail, and then, letting them in, the diligence, the data room. We operate in situations where we have, some of our clients, they're very well prepared, they're very organized, they realize these things need to be done, and they're out in front and engaging us early and asking us to assist. Other times we're brought in a little later in the process, and it can be a bit of a scramble. And we certainly do the best that we can to organize and present things, but hopefully damage won't have been done ahead of time.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Well, we're at that time for Q&A, and I see some questions in, so I say we attack. So Ernest has one. He says, He won a Shark Tank investor investment pitch deck out of 200 people. So congratulations. That's no easy task. We've all been part of those at different levels. So as a professional with much more experience, what detailed information do you both look for in capital raising decks, both immediately and throughout? If it's too detailed and planned out, let's say for up to, three up to 5 to 10 years, is that too overwhelming or oversharing to VCs and investors? So there's a lot to unpack there. One of the things that matters is that, at the end of the day, no matter what the business is, people invest in people, right? So they need to feel that comfort level and trust level and being able to see, um, who the people are in the organization. In fact, one of the things we work on almost out of the gate are founder and executive and director bios, to make sure that people really, it's amazing how much detail that's important that people leave out of their bios, so, and I know numbers are important and things like that, but I'm telling you what, if they trust you, they're going to trust the rest of the information that's in that packet. So there's a lot of things to talk about here, Jack. We could probably spend a whole hour on pitch decks, but what would be the one thing you're drawn to first?
Well, on the subject of the bios, and I think that that is an excellent one. I think that one of the most important things to keep in mind is not just giving everybody a laundry list of everything that each management team member has done in the course of their career. Focus and narrow on the relevant things and the things that are going to enable a particular director or manager to contribute to the success of this particular business. From the legal side, there are two dirty words that everybody prefers to avoid, but I think are critical, to any well put together pitch deck. Got to have the legal disclaimers up front, but
Oh
more
yeah.
important than that, are the risk factors. You don't want them to be too long. You don't want them to be too short. You want them to be very industry specific, and specific to your business. And you want to identify, the real high points, the things that people ought to be aware, are risks in your business, whether it's regulatory risk, competition risk, things that are changing in the business and the way that people go about delivering, a particular good or service. All of those things are going to signal, that you're forthcoming. And by being forthcoming and getting these things out in front in the pitch deck, it's also a shield against being sued later for not having told people about them. So, you don't want to, disclose, everything you can possibly think of. You want it to be relevant, but you want to make sure you don't miss, a key relevant item, and you want to get that right in the pitch deck.
Yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, and I would say too, based on the financials, I'd say I always prefer 5 years out. I like to see that there's a plan to establish, even if you have a 3-year exit, what's the possibilities or what do you see for the next 5 years? I think that's a safe run out for forecasting. And then, of course, the other thing that's interesting that I find interesting that a lot of people leave out is a timeline of how did you get here and where are you going? You know what I mean? So let's say you've raised seed capital or friends and family round. Um, and other things, and so you know you just want to make sure that people know how you got here and what you've gone through and the successes and the hurdles that you've gone through to get to this spot, and then to the where you see the next hurdle. So you're filing your IP, you're gonna you're gonna all of a sudden you're gonna kick up production to this amount, for here, and then production's gonna go up to here, and you're going to do another round of a capital raise here. You're very succinct and exactly what that looks like. So I think that's important too, that people see can see on a one pager, on one slide that you have a plan that you're executing. Um, so we have another question for Harsh is while applying, this is going to be for you, Jack, while applying for licensing any product, what are the things to keep in mind?
Well, um, when you say applying for a license, that's a pretty broad, pretty open-ended question. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is, regulatory. Oftentimes, to the extent that you operate in the securities business, as a broker dealer or, as some other, regulated entity, you want to make sure you have the right regulatory licenses in order to engage in the business that you're in or sell the products or securities, whatever they may be, that you are. The form of the actual licensing agreement itself, that can take, depending on whether you're the licensor or the licensee, they're all, we could spend a whole session on the type of issues that come up in a licensing scenario, such as whether you allow sub-licensing or not. There are oftentimes indemnifications that come in. There are, IP issues that come in licensing. I don't think we've got time to, really, do justice, to a question, like that. There are too many paths we can go down.
Yeah, no, I agree. There's a lot of yeah, and it all depends on the type of licensing. That's the thing, there's just so many different types of licensing that are involved. But I would encourage you to get a hold of Jack and Cogent to discuss that further though, because you definitely want to be protected in anything that you're licensing. I've seen a lot of people lose a lot of things because they signed the wrong licenses. So, but thank you very much, Harsh, for that question. Forrest has a question. Loved it. Enjoy the webinars. Thank you so much. And so for the question, as a founder, you must perform due diligence on potential bankers. Not all bankers and buyers are created equally. That's very true, as well as law firms and accounting firms, etc. So please discuss major red flags founders should be aware of on the downside of not doing so. So it's like anything. What you want to do is just make sure you get to know the people, just like somebody wants to get to know you and your company. Make sure, you have to be able to trust the people that you're working with. So the best bet is to get a referral. Make sure you ask somebody who's already done business with that bank. And that's how Jack and I do a lot of our business, is a lot of is achieved by referrals. So, and speaking of referrals, that once maybe get to that bank, you have every right to ask them for referrals that they have that they can give of people that are similar to your situation, your size, your business, your type, in order to just understand that they know how to work on what you need them to work on, right? They understand the phase that you're at, where you're trying to go, so that you just make sure that they can actually help in that scenario and some sort of a track record, whether it's by the partners, the individuals, or the firm, but just make sure there's a track record that's, apparent when you're going to do business with them. Jack, what else would you add to that?
I would add to that, you want to look on the, for the good things and, and in that category, it's going to, as Dean said, it's going to be track record. Look at the deals they've closed. Look at the size of the deals, look at the relevance of the deals, look at the relevance to your business. All of that will help you, to be able to identify, if this banker has or lawyer, for that matter, has the capability and bandwidth to work with and represent you. I would also flip that around, and I would look, and there are all sorts of AI and other research tools out there that you can use to do this. If you're looking to engage a law firm, find out what malpractice suits they may have had filed against the firm, and might be outstanding or pending. I can think of a half dozen major, virtually household name law firms that if you Googled them and inquired about litigation, you'd find some very interesting things, and which might give you pause, or give you cause you to rethink whether this firm is the right law firm for you. Um, so, you want to do, due diligence on all of your advisors, whether it's the bankers, the lawyers, the transfer agent, what have you. And, I think we live in a world, today where there are more, and more ways that people can access information. And, I would suggest using it.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, all right. Well, hopefully you found that helpful and you found this useful. This session is being recorded. And so after this session, which we're going to end here shortly, just want to let you know that we appreciate each and every one of you. I mean, we're only here because of you. So what really helps us out is you asking questions and letting us know what's important to you so that we know how to prepare any of the next webcast. So I would say from all of us here, again, we appreciate everything that you guys do in terms of spending your time with us. That's important. And please don't hesitate to reach out to us for anything you might need on the security side or the legal side. Jack, any parting words on your side?
I would just remind everyone that the last of this series of three webinars is going to be held at the same time next week, Wednesday afternoon, 4 o'clock Eastern. The focus on that one, sort of continuing with the theme that we've been covering over the past 2 weeks. Next time we're going to be focusing on liquidity, and that it's not an event, but a strategic path for founders. And so hopefully, you'll make a note on your calendars and plan to join us again next week. And as Dean said, we're certainly available to, the extent you'd like to reach out to one of us. Cogent typically, will, in connection with a potential legal matter, we'll schedule a 20-30 minute session to discuss a potential matter. We can't give legal advice in those sessions, because prior to someone becoming an actual client, but we can talk through what some of the high level issues might be, and whether we would be an appropriate firm to represent you. So we do hope that you reach out, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, from all of us here in Chicago and Fort Lauderdale,
Fort
right?
Lauderdale.
Yeah, Fort Lauderdale. And to all of you across the world, because we did have some people from overseas, India and such. I just want to thank you again for participating, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.